Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China, and I'm Jerry. Everything you've ever read about China in Western mainstream media is wrong. Everything. So many experts get so many things wrong about China that would be impossible in one video to do justice to so much misunderstanding. Instead, here are just a few of the more commonly heard predictions, accusations, and allegations about China. First, the big one. China is collapsing, but it isn't. COVID slowed China's growth, but there's been constant and positive growth. It's still forecast to grow even stronger as it goes through the current COVID issues, where many people have caught the virus. What the reports will scream at you is, China's economic growth slumps. But when you read the report, you find that despite the wording showing horror stories of slumps, there was still, unlike the USA, UK, and most European countries, positive growth. In America, the government redefined what a recession is to prove they aren't in one. They don't show growth, they report losses, but they redefine them as negative growth. Which country is more likely to experience an economic collapse? The one that's constantly growing, but growing a little slower than previously? Or the one that needs to invent new terms to hoodwink their public by creating new terms to describe old failures? The second one is, China opened too soon, but it didn't. Experts complained loud and long that China needed to open as it was affecting the economy and people's livelihoods. China waited until the right time to open, and they opened. Remember when they didn't open? There was criticism. Now they have opened, there's criticism. They could never have won that particular debate. Here's another wrong prediction. China is authoritarian. But it isn't. We saw a lot of protests, and there were international media crews present at many of them. Look how many people you saw shot, or shot at, or tear-gassed. That would be none. How many rubber bullets were expended in those recent protests? Again, that would be none. BBC and CNN, among others, are still, a month later, scouring the streets attempting to find people who will complain about the government, but struggling to do so. Assuming they are real journalists, they would have sent people to the hospitals to see how many protesters needed treatment for injuries, the injuries received from the police beatings, and again, that would be none. If there were, you can guarantee they would have hit headlines around the world. Yet another misinterpretation is that China is undemocratic, but it isn't. The Chinese people, when asked, are very happy about the state of their democracy. The only problem is, no one asks them. The experts like to say that their country has the best form of democracy, so a Chinese person's opinion on democracy isn't valid to them. China's leaders go through a process of education, qualification, election, and selection, and further elections to get to higher posts. It's incredibly democratic, just not the same as being able to vote for the person with the largest budget who gets the most advertising space. Some experts also think China is poor, but it isn't. China has the world's largest middle class. It isn't the richest country by a long way, and even though it has the second highest GDP in the world, it has such a large population that the per capita GDP is still relatively small. However, that isn't a good measure of how rich a country is. What Chinese people earn is enough for most of them to buy what they need, and that's the important thing. It's not how much money you get, but how far does that money go in giving you the lifestyle you want. Parts of the USA are so bad that they've created another new term to describe one lifestyle, vehicle residency. Wow, that describes the number of people who can't afford to buy or rent a home, so they live in their car. China isn't that poor. Other experts think China is rich, but it isn't. It's impossible to say a country that has so recently lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty is rich. Rural China is still extremely poor. What we don't see is anyone homeless. Everyone gets to go to school. Even medical care isn't going to send you to the bankruptcy courts. And contrary to Western media and some expert opinions, almost everyone is covered by at least some form of medical insurance and universal coverage. And where it's needed to be paid for, the costs of treatments are considerably lower than the West. So then the experts move to suggesting that China is expanding militarily. But it isn't. There are a couple of bases in the South China Seas, that much is true. But where exactly is the South China Sea? It's just off the coast of South China. So it's hardly an expansion. There are some disputes, but even China's neighbors aren't really angry with China. Certainly not as angry as Western